Ruchem Aboim, Shem Irgin Shir Torah, Moses Boston. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's shir. The men here in the main shul, the women upstairs and downstairs, and everyone listening on the phone and watching through the live stream. As you've been hearing, Irgin Shir Torah's annual dinner is coming up in a few short days, Wednesday, August 16th. This is the perfect time to put an ad in the journal and show you Akras HaTov to Irgin Shir Torah and to the Rabbanim whose shiurim you've enjoyed throughout the summer or throughout the year, and have a chelik and Abotzas HaTorah of Irgin Shir Torah worldwide. Tonight's shir is sponsored by Elim Shem, the Nishmas Rav Chaim Yitzchak ben Rav Israel, Zatzal, and the Nishmas Aisha Shalamas, Naomi, Bas Rav Gedalia, Aryeh, Allah Shalom. Tonight we have the special opportunity covered to have with us Rabbi Yosef Sayagh, Shlita Director, International Network of Boitke Shatnez, to give us a Shatnez update on what's behind the label and practical halachas and inyanim of Hilchas Shatnez. Rav Sayagh.
Firstly, I would like to thank Irgun Shirei Torah for inviting us to come here to speak about Shatnez. Our bracha is that he should see bracha from his Priya Malai. He should continue to be Marbitz Torah all over the world, and we should all be nene from his shiurim. The Poischim B'chvoid Achsanya, the shir today is being given in the Boston Shtibel, so I would like to start out with a fascinating story that happened with us in the Boston Rebbe. Now, this story I heard firsthand from the person who it happened to. And then when I met the Boston Rebbe by one of the Agudah conventions, I asked him over the story, and he confirmed it that it was true. There was this person that had gotten sick, and he fell into a coma. And this person, since he was a chassid of the Boston Rebbe, so they went running to the Boston Rebbe, and the Boston Rebbe told them that he should give tzedakah, and tzedakah is tatzil mimaves. So the wife went running to the hospital. She put money into the hands of the sick person, and she told me it's an amazing thing. Even though he was in a coma, he was able to lift up his hand, and then they gave that money to tzedakah, and then he got better. 7 years later, this person got sick again, and again they went to the Boston Rebbe, and the Boston Rebbe said, if the clothing is kosher, then he'll be okay. So they lived at the time in Cherry Hill. They came running into the Lakewood Shatnez laboratory with his jacket, and Rabbi Shakat was testing the jacket. At first he didn't find anything, but the person who brought it in insisted to check it again, and lo and behold, he found Shatnez. So here I have the actual piece of the Shatnez that was found. It's under the collar. The fabric under the collar was recycled, and when things are recycled, it's not so easy to find, but after searching a number of times, he found there was linen inside this fabric under the collar. So a few years after that, I was doing a house call for this lady, who now she was an almana, and she had moved to Lakewood. She had bought a rug, and she wanted me to test her rug, and she told me over the whole story, and she told me on that day that Rabbi Shakat found the Shatnez in this person's jacket, even though the doctors had given up, but on that day they had thought of a new procedure, a new approach, and they tried it, and he got better. So this is, and then I met the Boston Rebbe, and he confirmed it that the story was true. So we begin. Shatnez is a pasuk in the Torah. It's a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze and also in Parshas Kedoshim. And in Yitzhak Hashem we'll get to both psukim. So the pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze, it says, Lo silvash Shatnez, we're not allowed to wear Shatnez, Tzeme upishtim yachdav. And it's from this few words that so many halachas is learnt out of. There's really 7 simonim in Shulchan Aruch. It's in Yeridea, starting from Reish Tzadi Ches. It goes all the way till Siman Dash. So Lo Silbash, the Issa of Lo Silbash is not only for men's clothing. Even though Mr. Rosenberger, Olav Hasholem, he put a strong emphasis on men's jackets and coats, but that was because in his times, most of the men's jackets were Shatnez. He even used to clap on the bima to get people's attention, and he would say, he bets $1,000. And the people heard $1,000, they jumped back. That what was his bet? That if 2 out of 3 people in the shul is not wearing Shatnez. That's how it was in his times, because like a tailor once told me, a jacket that wasn't lined with linen, it was like you were cheating the customer. If a tailor didn't put linen as a reinforcement, he was cheating the customer. So that's why all jackets in those times had Shatnez, and since that was the most common Shatnez was found in men's jackets, and Mr. Rosenberger tried to push the mitzvah, so he made a strong emphasis on men's clothing. But as we'll see through the Shia, it's not only in men's clothing that we find Shatnez, it's also in women's clothing and in children's clothing. And it's not only in Geisha stores, it's even from Jewish stores. So that's Lo Silbash, Shatnez, Tzemer Upishtim. The Issa is Tzemer, which the Shulchan Aruch says, Tzemer is referring to Tzemer Rechelim, which is sheep's wool, which that includes elim, rams, and lamb's wool. And the Issa is together with Pishton. Pishton is linen. Linen is something that grows from the ground. You see the picture over here. This is linen is a plant, and it's from the stem of the plant is where the linen is produced. These are the raw stalks of linen, and it's the linen fiber grows on these stalks. So the Issa of Shatnez is Tzemer Upishtim, is wool and linen together. Each one by themselves is perfectly fine. The Issa of Shatnez is the Tareves, and that is the taich of the word Shatnez. Shatnez is the mixture, the Tareves of Tzemer Upishtim. Now exactly what's considered a mixture, what's not considered a mixture, these are all the complicated halachas in Hilchos Shatnez. So the first thing, in order to be mekayim this mitzvah, is to get used to reading the labels, which one would think it's so obvious, it's something that we don't even have to mention, but I can show you about once a week or once in 2 weeks, I get a garment that's brought into the Shatnez laboratory that says on the label wool and linen. And so it's happened many a times that the actual garments were even worn. So I brought here a few examples. Here's a J. Crew blue vest, which doesn't appear to be made of wool and linen. It looks like a regular wool sweater, and this was actually worn. And on the label it says 55% wool and 45% linen. Here's a Zara dress. I'm mentioning the common brand names which are purchased all the time. So this also says on the label wool and linen. I was giving a demonstration in one of the girls' schools, and one of the little girls said that she came over to tell us that this was her Shabbos dress. So then the Mora went and called the mother and told the mother that she better read the label, because on the label actually says it was made of wool and linen. Here's an Ann Taylor sweater, which also says it's made of wool and linen. And here's a coat that this lady came into the Shatnez laboratory in Lakewood. She was actually wearing the coat. It was towards the end of the winter, so it was like Purim time. She brought in to bring her husband's jacket, and then she said, you know what, she didn't test her coat. She took off her coat. It's a Saks Fifth Avenue coat, and on the label says it's made of wool and linen. So even things that are so unassuming could be made of wool and linen. So that's the first lesson, is just to get used to reading the labels. Now what has to be checked? Anything that's mentions wool on the label is something that would have to be checked. So here I bought some here's a child's skirt. It's Mademoiselle, which was sold in Lakewood. It's wool. All it says on the label is wool. However, this pink fabric, which is reinforcing the waist, is linen, and the lining inside the pocket is also linen. So anything that has wool is something that has to be checked. Now, even though we advertised this right away, not one of them came back. Here's a geese swine sweater, which has a linen trim. Now, the trim is linen. It's brown trim on the edge. Now, wool sweaters have to be checked for shatnez, even though we assume that wool sweaters have nothing to them. A jacket, we can understand why jackets have to be checked. A jacket has interlinings, reinforcements. But if you look at a sweater, there's no reinforcements. So that's always the question, why do I have to check a wool sweater? If a wool sweater has a trimming of some sort, then I can understand. But if it's a solid blue sweater with nothing at all, why does that have to be checked? So the answer is because there's reinforcement threads that we find in the joints of the sweater. How these threads get in there, how these stray threads get in there, that's different theories. But that's the Lemaisa, this is what we find. There's about, in an average sweater, you have about 10 joints, and every joint has to be checked. And a lot of the times, especially in the neck joints, that's where we find stray threads of linen. Okay. Now, all linen items also have to be checked. So if it mentions linen on the label, that also has to be checked. So here I have some examples. Here you have a little boy's J. Crew linen jacket, which right here under the collar there's wool, and the whole inside of the jacket is also lined with wool. I'm going to turn this inside out, because that's what we do at the Shatnez laboratory. And this canvas, this stiffening inside the jacket, which holds the whole shape of the jacket, is wool. So most linen jackets have shatnez, and that's because of the canvas, which is inside the jacket, contains wool. Linen sweaters are also a very common finding. Most linen sweaters do have shatnez also. It could either be in the fabric. Here's a J. Crew linen sweater, which says on the label 52% linen, 48% polyester. The actual fabric of this sweater is wool and linen. It's mislabeled. Here's a Neiman Marcus linen sweater, where the black trim is wool. So these are the obvious cases, but the most common shatnez that we find in linen sweaters is the actual yarn that sews the sweater together is wool. Or in the joints again, we also find remnants of wool threads. Now, the Shulchan Aruch writes that noitza shel izim is not shatnez. If I take goat's hair and I mix it together with linen, that is not shatnez. So what would be an example of goat's hair that we use in clothing today is cashmere. Cashmere is a very common fiber that's used. So if I know I have cashmere and linen, and I know it's really cashmere, then that wouldn't be a problem at all. However, today, if in the industry, there's a lot of cashmere, and the question is, how come there's so much cashmere? Because really, the cashmere goat produces either 2 ounces of hair or 4 ounces of hair in the entire year. And if that's the case, then cashmere should be very expensive. And I've had cases where people have come and they bought a sweater in Manhattan, a cashmere sweater, and they spent up to $800, $1,000 just for one sweater. And if it's really cashmere, that should be the price. But we can go to Macy's or other stores and you can buy a cashmere sweater for $40, $50. So the answer is, in the industry today, they're allowed to label cashmere as long as the fibers have the same feel as cashmere. It doesn't have to actually be cashmere. If you can take sheep's wool, lamb's wool, you can find the soft fibers of sheep's wool, and that could be labeled as cashmere. So therefore, if somebody brings in a garment that says on the label, cashmere and linen, so a lot of testing is required to make sure that it's actually cashmere and not wool. But many a times, it would be a blend of wool and cashmere. Now, another fiber that's not shatnez is canvas. The Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to take canvas and mix that with tzemer. Now, what is canvas? Canvas in English is hemp. Hemp, H-E-M-P. So hemp and wool is not shatnez. But hemp and wool also has the same issue. Hemp, because today till now hemp was illegal because hemp was produced from a plant that its leaves produced marijuana. So that's why hemp wasn't so common, but now they're farming different species of hemp that don't have these marijuana leaves. So we're seeing in the industry today a lot of hemp and wool. So, but here the issue is also that they mix the hemp together with the linen. And so we always have to make sure that it's really hemp and not linen. Now this is one of the most difficult tests which the Shatnez laboratories have, is to be able to determine if it's hemp or linen. Because when most of our testing we do is between iron or with the microscope, and under the microscope, hemp and linen are identical, they look exactly the same. So, however, there's a Shitas HaRishonim, which is brought down in Taisus, which is the Rabbeinu Ephraim, which the Rabbeinu Ephraim holds that this is what the Torah says, Pishton is not referring to linen, it's referring to hemp. So, according to the Rabbeinu Ephraim, hemp and wool would be shatnez. So if Shlomo Klugen, the way Shlomo brings a raya to the Rabbeinu Ephraim, he says in Yeshua, it says, when Pinchas and Kalev went to spy Yerichai, it says over there that Rachav Hazayna took Pinchas and Kalev, a Titzman name, and she hid them bepishtei ha'etz. She hid them in pishtei ha'etz. So the pasuk calls linen eitz, a piece of wood. And if you take a look at linen, linen is not a piece of wood. Linen is a thin stalk. As opposed to canvas, hemp is like is a piece of wood. So from there, the Rav Shlomo Kluger brings a rayat to the Rabbeinu Ephraim that Pishtan in the Torah is referring to hemp. Now, even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins, it's Pishtan and not hemp, canvas is muter im hatzemeh, we're allowed to mix hemp and wool, but the Yirei Shamayim should be machmir and should not use hemp and wool. And this is the industry today. The industry today is using more hemp than they used to. So now we know what has to be checked is any garment that mentions wool or any garment that mentions linen. Now, there's issues today of things that are mislabeled. Here I have a jacket, a lady's jacket that was purchased in a store in Borough Park, that this lady had convinced this woman that it doesn't need to be checked. But this woman is very makbid, and she checks everything, and she brought it in to be checked. Now, this label reads 100% silk, made in USA. So something made in USA, and it's 100% silk, one would think it doesn't have to be checked. However, this turned out to be, it was wool and linen. It's totally mislabeled. So the question is, how do we know if something is mislabeled? So in order to understand that, I'm going to demonstrate to you what shua and tavi is. We're going to see how threads are made, how fabrics are made, and then we'll understand what type of fabrics could be mislabeled. So this is really in Siman Shin, where in Siman Shin we talk about the word Shatnez. The word Shatnez is broken down into 3 words, shua, tavi, and nuz. The Shin Ayin, which is the first 2 letters of Shatnez, makes the word shua, which means combing, which I'm going to demonstrate to you. The middle letter, which is tes, is tavi, which is spinning. And the last 2 letters, nun zayin, makes the word nuz, which is machlekes harishainim, exactly what's the touch of the word nuz. So let's demonstrate the shua and the tavi, and then we'll understand what type of fabrics are possibly mislabeled. So I have over here a wooden comb which has metal teeth. I'm going to take a lock of wool. I'm going to attach it to the teeth of this comb. And then with a second comb, I'm going to actually comb it. So what I'm doing right now is shua, which is combing, which is straightening out the fibers. And that's the first step in preparing wool, is to straighten them out. Now, after the fibers have been combed, the fibers are removed from the comb. As you see, as it comes off the comb, it comes off in the shape of a tongue. That's why the Mishnah in Elam Metzias calls it Leshones Shel Argamon, if one finds tongues of wool, because this is what it looks like after it's combed. Now, after the wool has been combed, we take what's called a spindle. A spindle is a stick which has a weight on the bottom, a hook on top. This is what we say in Eishes Chayil. The Eishes Chayil is Dorshot Seme Upishtim. The Eishes Chayil makes sure all the threads and fabrics in the home is free of shatnez. It says, V'chapeha tamcha folech. With her hand she holds a plach. This is what's called a plach, which is a stick which has a weight on the bottom and a hook on top. Now we take this tongue of wool, we attach it to this hook on top. Now gravity is going to pull it downwards, and as it falls downwards, it twists and ties all the fibers together, creating a thread. So this is tavi, the middle letter of the word Shatnez. So Shatnez, I demonstrated the shua, which is the combing, and this is the tvia, which is the spinning. Now nuz one type of nuz is shazira. What does shazira mean? Shazira means plying. Because what happens is, after this is spun, if you leave go, it's just going to unravel, it's going to untwist. So something has to be done to this thread that it shouldn't untwist. So what they do to this thread is, they do what's called plying. I'm going to take this thread off the comb, off the spindle. So I took the thread off the spindle. Now I put it back. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to twist it in the opposite direction. Now by twisting it again in the opposite direction, the two threads are going to interlock with each other. Then it won't unravel. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a two-ply thread. Like since this is a kafel shmeina, this is just a chut kafel. So this is what's called plying, and this is what's called making a chut shazur. And that's how the Rabbeinu Tam and Rav Rishonim learn. The taich of the word nuz is shazur. So in order to create Shatnez mid'oraisa, all you need is you take a two-ply thread of wool and a two-ply thread of linen. Yachdav, you put those two threads together, no matter how. You can knot them, spin, you can knot them, tie them, weave them together. Then you would have created Shatnez mid'oraisa. So sweaters, which have a two-ply thread of linen, and all sweaters are two-ply thread yarns. So you have a little two-ply thread of linen found in a sweater. That's already Shatnez d'oraisa according to Rav Rishonim. The Mechaber says a chut kolshehu, that's all you need to create Shatnez. So a sweater has a chashash Shatnez d'oraisa. So as you see over here, this thread is not going to unravel, it's going to stay exactly the way it is. Okay. So now, all I've shown you is what a wool thread looks like. If you take a look at this wool thread, it has the same thickness all along. Now let's take some wool and linen and mix the two together and let's see what happens. Now the Issa of Shatnez is only like Silbash. That's the last siman in Hilchah Shatnez, which is siman Dosh, where the Mechaber says, it's muter la'aseison ulekaimon. There's no Issa to make Shatnez. The Issa is only like Silbash. So what I'm going to be doing now, making Shatnez that there's no Issa. It's not like Botza v'chalav, where the Issa is like Sevashel. See here I took some wool and linen, and I'm going to mix the wool and the linen together. Now from this mixture, I'm going to spin a yarn that's going to be made of wool and linen. Now we're going to see what a wool and linen thread looks like. So here from this mixture I'm going to spin. Now what happens is, because linen is something that's hard and wool is something that's soft, what tends to happen, because of the linen that's mixed into the thread, it creates an uneven thread. It creates a thread that has enlarged areas. That's because of the linen that's mixed into it. So a typical linen fabric will have yarns of uneven thicknesses, or will have what's called slubs. which is streaks or balls thrown out throughout the entire fabric. Now, this type of Shatnez is Shitas Rashi. Rashi holds in order to be Shatnez Deiraisa, the wool and the linen has to be mixed all the way from the beginning. Has to be combed together, then spun together. And Rashi teaches nuz means woven. You take all these threads and you put them on a weaving loom and you create a fabric made of wool and linen. So now, we would think and we would guess that these type of fabrics don't exist today, but let me show you some of them, and then you'll start noticing them when you go to the stores, and you'll see now you'll understand which type of fabrics are more suspect of being Shatnez. So here's a skirt. It's a Yiv Selarah skirt. You see this fabric over here is black, has little white streaks spread out all over it. All the white streaks are linen, and all the black is wool. So when you see something that looks like a mixture, that's questionable, and that could be mislabeled. Even if this garment would say 100% wool, this could be a mislabeled garment. This particular garment did not have any label on it, but when it was tested, it was found to be wool and linen. Here's another obvious example. This was a house call that I did here in Flatbush. And what happened was this woman went to Eretz Yisrael for Sukkot with her whole family. She got sick in Eretz Yisrael. She got some type of skin disease. So her entire family came back after Sukkot, but she had to stay. And when she got better, she came back to America. And while she was there, she was thinking, why did she have to stay? Why did it happen to her? And she thought maybe it's because she had never checked any of her clothing for Shatnez. Now, her two main Moschino jackets that she was wearing all the time turned out to be wool and linen, and this was one of them. This also has no content label, but the pink is wool and all the white is linen. And this is Shatnez according to Shittas Rashi, which the Rabbeinu Tam also holds of Shittas Rashi. Okay, so now we'll go to the next step. Now, what happens if you have a garment that doesn't mention wool, doesn't mention linen, it doesn't have a linen look? That means it doesn't look like a mixture of any sort. Would that have to be checked or not? So the answer is all jackets have to be checked regardless of what it says on the label. Here's a little boy's jacket. This little boy's jacket is made by a Hamisher company. Now, why, even though this label says polyester and viscose, no mention of wool or linen, but we say every jacket has to be checked because of its inner components. In the inner components of a jacket, they always use wool because that's an ingredient that's needed that the jacket should retain its shape. So what we do in the Shatnez laboratory, we again turn the jacket inside out. We don't only look at the shoulder pad, we look at all stiffenings and every piece of material that's found inside a jacket. In an average jacket, we look at about 35 places. So here, in the body of the jacket, the main reinforcement has wool in it. But there's a small fabric which is sitting over the shoulder pad that has white threads in it that are linen. So here you have wool and linen inside this jacket. And this is a common finding. I had this week a J. Crew 100% cotton jacket, which the fabric under the collar was wool and linen. If you lift up your collar, you'll see a felt fabric that felt fabric was wool. In most cases, it's wool or a wool blend. And there's a stiffening behind it, which is linen. Okay, so that's the first thing. All jackets should be checked. Here I have another jacket. This is a lady's jacket, which was made by a Hamisher company in Williamsburg. Now it says on the label, it's a Val Lauren. It says on it 100% polyester made in the USA. But the fabric in the front of the jacket is wool and linen. Now, trimmings. Anything that has a trim, that also has to be checked. Sometimes the trimming, this is a polyester viscose jacket. It was sold here in Borough Park. It's a Hocker Berlin. It really doesn't have any insides to it. It has little foam shoulder pads. But the trimming that goes along the edge is wool and linen. So the trimmings themselves could have wool and linen. Here's a little hat, which this little hat says on it 100% polyester, but this was brought in to be tested because the person did not read the label. It just had a wool feel to it. And it turned out to be, it was really wool and polyester. The pom-poms itself are 100% wool, and there's a white thread that's attaching the pom-pom to the hat, which is 100% linen. Now this is a 2-ply linen thread, and the threads of the pom-pom are also 2-ply, so this is Shatnez Deiraisa, according to Rav Rishonim. Appliques are also an issue. This is an acrylic and cotton sweatshirt, where the applique, the apron is wool, and the actual teddy bear is a linen blend. So if it's a jacket, or there's any type of a trim, a pom-pom or applique, those things should be checked for Shatnez. Russian fur hats, which are used a lot in the winter. All these hats have, not all of them, but many of them have Shatnez. And where is the Shatnez inside this Russian fur hat? So some stiffenings have to be put inside the hat that it shall retain its shape. So when this is brought into a Shatnez laboratory, we'll turn the hat inside out. This is only open this much for demonstration purposes, but this is not what we actually do. Now, here, inside the ears of this hat, I'm going to pull out a fabric where this fabric here is made of wool and linen. So a lot of these Russian hats have linen and wool inside the hats. Now this is what's called a felt. In the Lashon of Shulchan Aruch, it's called levadim. A leved is fibers pressed together. It's not actually woven, it's just fibers pressed together. This is made up of wool and linen, which according to most Rishonim, in order to be Shatnez Deiraisa, you need to have Shua, Tovi, and Nuz. You have to have all 3 steps. But the Rambam holds you don't need all 3 steps. One of them, each one by themselves could create Shatnez Deiraisa, which is Shua by itself, Tovi by itself, and Nuz by itself. So here is an example of Shua by itself. You took wool and linen, you combed it, and then you pressed it together. So here you've created a fabric that's made of wool, a felt fabric that's made of wool and linen. So this would be Shatnez Deiraisa according to the Rambam. Now, unfortunately, you have people coming back from the Ukraine or from Russia. They buy these hats and then they wear it while they're davening by the Kivrei Tzadikim, only to find out when they come back to America or years later that it was Shatnez. We know the Sfarim say that Shatnez is ma'akev the tefillas. That's the Rikanti. The Rikanti says what happens is, when somebody wears Shatnez, he brings the two malachim together, which the malachim create a mechitza that doesn't allow the tefillas to go up. Now, what brought about this shir today is an incident that happened in Bar Park by one of the cleaners, which we just discovered. This is a Hamisha cleaners. It's a cleaner that's the owner of the cleaners claims he knows how to test for Shatnez. One of the main things that he does is he fixes talesim. If somebody has a talis which has to be repaired, so they take it to him and then he fixes the talis. Now, there's this person living in Eretz Yisrael which had brought one of his talesim to be checked, and because there was a shir that was given on Shatnez, and they mentioned during the shir that any alterations, if at the alterations they added a piece of material, then that raises a red flag and that should be checked. Actual sewing thread is not a chashash. We're not concerned about thread. If they just use thread for hem and so on, that's not a problem, because sewing machines cannot hold linen thread. However, if a cleaner or a tailor would add a piece of material, that's a concern, because we're concerned what is that material that was added. So this person brought in his talis, and this was the actual talis, and here on the side of the talis they added a piece of linen. And then he bought another talis, and then another talis. He had like 6 talesim, which had been repaired over the last 10 years. And even one from 10 years ago was also repaired with linen. So this person had been wearing Shatnez for 10 years. And we went into his store, and first he told us he doesn't have anything, but then another person went in, and then finally we got out of him a lot of his fabrics, and he had rolls of white fabric that he thought was polyester, which turned out to be linen blends. So we don't know how many talesim are around today that have been fixed by him that are Shatnez. And this is the last thing that we want to be Shatnez, because we don't want our tefillas not to be accepted. Now I have also over here a skirt. I did a house call in one of the homes here in Flatbush. This is a fabric that was bought out of a fabric store here in Flatbush. This fabric is wool in one direction, linen in the other direction. Now, who knows how many garments were made out of this roll of fabric? Because this is not, it's unassuming. You have to look closely. If you look closely, you'll see yarns of uneven thicknesses, which that should alert you that maybe it's a problem. Okay, so now what we're going to get to is the second pasuk of Shatnez, which is in Parshas Kedoshim, where the pasuk says, "Uveget kil'ayim Shatnez loy yale alecha." So till now we discussed different types of clothing that have to be checked. But the pasuk loy yale alecha is not talking about clothing; it's talking about a blanket. Where the Yushalmi explains, if one has a blanket, a huge blanket, which on one corner there's Shatnez, he's not allowed, even though that part of the blanket is laying on the floor, he's not allowed to cover himself with the other end of the blanket, because it's all one chefza shel issa. Now, of course, regular quilts, you don't need to check, but if one has a woolen blanket, that should raise a question. Children's blankets, which have an applique. The appliques could be a problem. So here you have a wool child's blanket that has an applique where the booties and the wheel of the carriage and the hat are linen. So Baruch Hashem, we've established many Shatnez laboratories all over the world. And that's one thing that we do, and one thing that we try very hard to make sure that every kehillah around the world has a Shatnez laboratory. Even in Iran today, we have a Shatnez laboratory. There was somebody who was learning in Baltimore, and he was planning on going back to Iran, which he actually did. And now he's a Rav of a Kehillah. He has 1,000 Mispalalim. There's about 25,000 Eden today over there. And he's the one who checks for Shatnez for them. I was in Istanbul. I opened a Shatnez laboratory there. And I just came back 2 weeks ago from Venezuela. I opened up a Shatnez laboratory over there too. So Baruch Hashem, we try very hard that wherever there's a Kehillah of Yidden, there should be professional Shatnez laboratories. So I was in Queens, and the Rav over there, when we went to talk to him about upgrading, so he tells me that one of his Mispalalim came to him and told him that they had a child, and the child's about 1 year old, and this child doesn't stop crying. The doctors had mentioned different things, but nothing had really helped. So the Rav said he had siyata d'shmaya, and he told them maybe the baby's blanket is Shatnez. Now he knew that this couple had come from Russia, and a lot of Russian clothing at the time was Shatnez. And they said they took in the baby's blanket to be checked, and it turned out to be wool and linen. And then they switched the blanket for a different blanket, and then the baby became a regular baby. Now pillows, sleeping pillows is not an issue. However, if one has a decorative pillow, that could be a problem. One of the problems that you could find is you can open up the pillow and see what's inside the pillow. See what's coming out of this pillow is all colorful fibers and threads. This is what's called recycled. Recycled materials is factories producing clothing. By the end of the day, they have a lot of remnants of threads and fibers all over. All that swept up and sent away to a different factory where it's cleaned and used for stuffings and many different things, as we'll see. But this, if the factory is making wool clothing and linen clothing, it's very possible that in the mix you'll have a mixture of wool and linen. Now there's many tshuvas written about recycled materials. Some of them are leheta, some of them are leissa, depending on the scenario. But definitely the Chazon Ish says a Yirei Shamayim should stay away from recycled materials. You shouldn't be nichnas into the shayla. So if a person is buying a pillow from Walmart or from any other store, you could do is just open it up a little bit. If you see it's a solid white, it's good. If it's all colorful, then that's a sign of recycled, and that's one should try to stay away from it. Now I'm going to show you other miscellaneous items that you may not think of that are Shatnez. Here I'm holding an oven mitt. This is a sif in Shulchan Aruch. That person is not allowed lo yikach adam beitza chama. One shouldn't hold a hot egg with a beged of kilayim. So here you have an oven mitt that's made for a Jewish company. If you turn it inside out, you can see through the open seam. You can see all colorful fibers and threads. So this is better to stay away from it. Now here I have work gloves, which they come in a package of 3, and only one of them had this recycled mix in the inside. They all had different swatches of material, but only one out of the 3 was an issue. Shoes is one of the recent issues that we're finding more and more Shatnez in shoes. Here's a Dr. Scholl's shoe, which this lady from Cherry Hill had it in the house for 3 months. She didn't want to wear it because she saw it has wool in it, till she had somebody bring it to Lakewood. Now the lining on the inside is linen. If you come up later, you can look inside, you'll see it has a linen look, has threads of uneven thicknesses. There's linen on the inside and wool on the outside. Here's an Uggs slipper. Now Uggs is only an issue if it has a fabric on the outside like you can see over here. Now this Ugg slipper you see is wool, And then the fabric on the outside, all this dark navy stripes that you see is linen. Here's scarves. This is scarves was made in a workshop in one of the camps. We spent a whole summer making this. One of the threads was a linen blend, and the other thread was a wool blend. Now here, today, the latest fashion is to have scarves made of many fur balls. And when you take a fur ball, in order that the ball should stay in its shape, it has to be filled with something. So these fur balls are sometimes filled with recycled material. In this particular scarf, there's so many balls, and so many of them are filled with different types of things. So we just gave it, the guy just gave up and let us just keep it to show it as a... Ties. This is a Ike Bahar tie made in Italy. Silk tie. At the bottom of the tie, there's a linen fabric, and the reinforcement inside the tie is a wool blend. So what's the rule in ties? The rule of ties is as follows, that if it's a wool tie, should be checked. If it's a linen tie, most linen ties have Shatnez, because the reinforcement inside the tie is wool, especially in the expensive ties. If it's a silk ties made in the USA or made in Italy, sometimes in the reinforcement of the tie, there's a fabric that has a blend of wool and linen. That we find in Hickey Freeman and Brooks Brothers ties. Now, there's the last thing is tablecloths are also not allowed to be Shatnez. That's the Mishabura and Hilchos Beis HaKnesses, which talks about a tablecloth. The tablecloth in the shuls are not allowed to be Shatnez, and at home too. Most tablecloths are not an issue of Shatnez because they're made of synthetic materials or cotton. But if one has a linen tablecloth, then the embroidery on the tablecloth could be wool. A lot of times it's just rayon, but it could also be wool. Now, before Pesach, there's a family here in Flatbush that went to one of the local stores and bought napkins that they wanted to use for the Seder night. The napkins were made of wool and linen. So that's a new thing where the actual fabric of the napkins were Shatnez. So I have here a piece of a carpet, which this family in Chicago wanted to carpet the entire house with this carpet. On the label it says wool and linen. So now one is not allowed to have a rug that's Shatnez. So now there's no issa to walk on Shatnez, especially if you're walking with shoes. There's no issa to walk on Shatnez. However, walking barefoot on Shatnez, that is a problem, especially if it's a soft carpet that you can sink into it. And also sitting on Shatnez, if you have children which are wearing shorts, especially in the summertime, where if they would sit on the carpet, there would be direct contact with their skin, that would be a problem. So even though you're allowed to walk, you're not allowed to sit on Shatnez. Okay. So now we see that Shatnez is not only in clothing, it encompasses everything that we use. We have to make sure that it doesn't have any Shatnez. And the Chachmas Adam, he finishes the Hilchos Shatnez by saying, Kol hazoyer sheloi lilbei Shatnez, if one is careful not to wear Shatnez, which we see is not such an easy thing to do, Yizke lilboish bigdei yesha ume'il tzedakah, will be zeicha for bigdei yesha. Now what is bigdei yesha? So I saw the Baba Baruch, he types bigdei yesha means begodim that will bring you Yeshuas. If a person checks for Shatnez, makes sure that his clothing do not have Shatnez, and then he wears those garments, they turn into big day yesha. They turn into begodim that will bring you yeshuas. There's a special bracha from the Pnei Zokan where the Kamana says, Hazoy bekelayim, yarich yomim ba'olam hazeh ba'olam haba, will be zeich tarichas yomim in olam hazeh and olam haba, v'la yovai oid begilgul, v'yenuach b'sholem al meshkovai b'erachayim, v'yoylid bonim tzadikim, and he'll be zeich to elach children, chayim v'kayomim, healthy children. V'yizke gam ba'olam hazeh l'chol tov, and then he'll also be zeicher to kol tov in olam hazeh. So this is a very special bracha which we see now that we've learned about Shatnez and we see how extensive it is. In the schus of keeping this mitzvah properly, we should be zeicher to all these brachas, and we should be zeicher to see the Mashiach and the Bin Beis Hamikdash B'Kar.
Make an appointment. Okay. One minute. Oh, you want to take some questions? You want to take some questions? Sure.
Okay. So if I can take a few questions. I'll repeat the question for the benefit of everybody else. Yes. So there's asay doicha loisa asay, which the question is that Shatnez is exempt from tzitzis, is exempt from Shatnez. That's what we learn. Asay is doicha loisa asay. The asay of gedilim taselacha is doicha the loisas of loisil b'Shatnez. But that was in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, or in the times when we had tcheles. Tcheles is blue wool. The tcheles had to be wool. And if one had tzitzis, that was linen. So the other strings were linen. So you were allowed to take linen strings and wool string of tcheles and tie them together onto the corner of the beged. But that was only in the times of tcheles. But today we don't have tcheles, so today we're not allowed to have Shatnez and tzitzis. Even that we were never allowed. The heter was only that tcheles was allowed to be Shatnez. That's also anyway, right? Yes. So regarding button threads, you're asking, is button threads a chashash of Shatnez? Is that what you're asking?
Are they mostly synthetic rather than...
So today, most button threads are not linen. Most button threads are polyrayons or nylon. If button threads would have been linen, then that would be Issa Deraisa. Because most button threads are 2-ply, and you take a linen thread, which is 2-ply, and you stick it into a fabric that's wool, so you teichav shteit chivais, one in and out motion, that's enough to create Shatnez Deraisa. So if one takes one button thread and attaches a button to a wool garment, that would be Shatnez Deraisa. But today we rarely find button threads that are linen. Yes. So the question is, what is the issa of a talis bag, a pocketbook, and a tablecloth? So that's the Gemara in Beitza. The Gemara in Beitza says a vilain, a curtain, is not allowed to be Shatnez. Shashamish mischamim boy. The shamish used to take it and wrap himself around with the curtain. So since it's something in the house that may be used for warmth, that is why Chazal said we're not allowed to have a curtain that is Shatnez. And that's an extension of that halacha was tablecloths, is because today we don't have it, but in England, where it's very, very cold and there was no heat in the shuls, I still remember people come in, especially on a Friday night, that the shul wasn't used the whole week, and it's all very, very cold, and you come in frozen, you take the tablecloth and you'd use the tablecloth to warm up your hands. So there was a chashash that you may use the tablecloth to warm yourself. Right. A pereiches is allowed to be shatnez because nobody will have the ha'azah to use a pereiches to warm themselves. Yes, because you hold it, you carry it, and as you're carrying it, the person carrying may be mechaven for chimon. Now, the Magen Avraham says if a person has draperies which are very high up, like you have a hall which is in a basement and the windows are very high up, you can't reach those draperies, that wouldn't be an issa, that could be shatnez. Yeah, that's no chesed, yeah. So you're touching on when is the chiyuv bedika, when is the chiyuv to check. So the rule is that anything that has any type of beged that has a reisa, shatnez is found in that type of garment. That's Vasna has a whole tshuva and says that's enough to make it called a miyat hamotzui, and then there's a chiyuv bedika. Oh, so I'll tell you. So you have shirts. You don't need to check your shirts. You don't have to check cotton pants that don't have any wool in them. That doesn't require testing. Sweaters that don't list wool or linen don't require testing. It's only sweaters that are made of wool. Garments that list wool or list linen or have a linen look, those are begadim that have a chashash. Then you have a chiyuv bedika. So we mentioned pocketbooks. The question is a pocketbook allowed to be shatnez or not? So the question is that doime to tik shel tefillin or not? Now, tik shel tefillin is not allowed to be shatnez because you hold it against your chest. That's why a tik shel tefillin. It's also there's a chashash of chimum. Now the question is a pocketbook doime to tik of tefillin, or there's a sif in Shulchan Aruch which talks about a purse. They used to take money. They used to take a bagad of shatnez and wrap. They used to wrap the money in with a bagad that is shatnez. So the Gemara in Beitza says, since money is hard, a davar kosher is not mechamem, so therefore you're allowed to have a purse, a tick of money is allowed to be shatnez. So the question is a pocketbook, is that comparison, do we compare it to a tick shel tefillin? Or do we compare it to a purse? So, Nissim Karelitz, I asked the Shaila to Nissim Karelitz, and he said a pocketbook is allowed to be shatnez. I asked of Hill David here in America, and he says, no, you're not allowed to. He said because the pocketbooks are made to match the outfits, it's like a part of more of a malbush. But I asked the Shaila also to the Emek HaTshuva, and he wrote a whole tshuva, and he says, no, there's no issa, pocketbook is allowed to be shatnez. So you have that's a Ramah. The Ramah says if a person has a cushion, a pillow that's filled with semo pishtim, so that would be a problem of shatnez. Because it's pressed together. Wool and linen pressed together, this is called press. When you have two fabrics on either side and it's held together, that's considered shua. Okay.
Baseball gloves?
The issue of baseball gloves also was an issue of recycled materials, because the paddings on the inside of the baseball gloves were recycled, and we did find wool and linen in that mix. So that there's stodim lekan. However, today you could get baseball gloves that don't have any recycled materials on the inside. Okay.
Any issue with hats?
Black hats? No, black hats is not an issue, but there's plenty other types of hats that could be an issue. But regular black cats is not an issue of Shatnez. Yeah.
Two fabrics pressed together. But what if one is wearing a linen shirt, wool pants, and you tuck it in with the belt? Aren't they pressed together at some point?
Good. So that's also a Ramah. It's good you bring up that point. The question is, wearing two garments, one which is wool and one which is linen, is that an issa of Shatnez? So the Ramah says, one is not allowed to wear two garments, one on top of each other. For example, to wear a wool jacket and a linen shirt, that would be asa because it's impossible to remove the one underneath without first removing the one on top. So that since Shatnez again is a mixture of wool and linen, there has to be some connection. The wool and the linen has to be connected in some way. So by wearing one on top of the other, since it's impossible to remove the one underneath, only by removing the one on top first, that's considered a connection of wool and linen. However, if one is wearing a linen shirt and a wool pants, you can remove one without removing the other, so that wouldn't be a problem.
Oven mitts. Any oven mitts that don't have recycled fiber in them?
Yeah, you can look on the questions, the oven mitt, is there any type of oven mitt that's not a problem? So when you turn the oven mitt inside out, if you see it's white on the inside, then it's fine. You'll see there's a lot of oven mitts that are that way too. Okay. Thank you.
B'Shem Yegin Shir Torah Moses Boston like a big as a character of a Sayagh for the very formative shir. Allah Alamaisa. I give you as a character Beilam Shem for the sponsoring tonight the Nishmas of Chaim Yitzchak ben Arav Israel. Lord Shalom and Aisha Shalamas Nomi Bas of Gedalia La Shalom. Rabbi Yosef Sayagh Shir Torah lies on the Tzibah to support the Shiurim. Please call Yegin Shir Torah 718-851-8651 or email tapecenter@yeshivanet.com to sponsor a shir or put in your ad in the journal to help Yegin Shir Torah Sabbatas Torah throughout the year. CDs of tonight's show will be available shortly. Yashakar everyone for coming. Rechananya ben Akashem Rotzak Baruch Lazakis is Yisrael Afika Hibam Tar Mitzvah Shenam Adonai Chofes Aman Sitka Yagdol